We all grew up with them, beat 'em up games, and we generally have pretty good nostalgia for them if we ended up playing a lot of them as a kid. Renting them or owning them and playing with them friends, it was a great genre. And it evolved tremendously into games such as Scott Pilgrim, Streets of Rage 4, and the newly released Shredder's Revenge. And because of the newly released Turtles game, Shredder's Revenge, and the upcoming Cowabunga collection, which actually re-releases the original TMNT 2 arcade for the NES, once again, which has been locked underneath the NES for a very long time, I really wanted to see whether or not this game was still worth playing.
So grab a slice of pizza, sit down. We're going to talk about some TMNT 2 arcade on the NES.
I'm JC.
I'm Ian.
And this is the Gamer's Gaiden. So, specifically on the Nintendo, this game came out in 1990. It was a port of the arcade. And at the time, we had a lot of ports for the arcades, which never were the arcade. And I have the 1-Up console. I remember bringing for the TMNT arcade. It's really fun to play. It is a better version of the game, but what I always found interesting about this game is it was a little bit harder because you didn't have unlimited quarters. And it had 2 additional levels, which were not in the original game. I didn't really enjoy how it was only 2 players and not 4, but looking back on it, I think it's because the game would have slowed down way too much.
We'll even see that in explosions and stuff when the game just clips right along when you have 5 things on
I
screen.
think the game checks to see whether or not how many enemies are on it. So the more enemies on it, it checks all the hitboxes and just really slows it down. That's just an educated guess, but yeah, it slows it down a lot. But for the most part, it's pretty smooth other than a little bit of sprite flicker due to the NES's limitation. But I think due to the limitation at the time as a kid, I really didn't care. And it was just Turtles on a console and, I could play it after Saturday morning cartoons. So it was really fun to get into. And it was a game that at the time, I constantly trained myself to try and beat the bosses and try and beat it as a kid, because that was one of that and beating Contra were kind of like 2 of the games that for the Nintendo that stick out to me, which I tried really hard to end up beating eventually.
Well, that's kind of a benchmark, I guess, of the genre at the time. Because if you look at things now, where you do have a character that levels up and gets better and bigger, and the game itself kind of gets a little bit easier to play as you go.
Yeah.
The only thing you could do at the time was get yourself better.
Yeah.
You had to level up yourself. Yeah, you had to get good. That was the mark of that style of gameplay.
And the era, really. A lot of the games where sometimes it was just perceived difficulty, and sometimes it was actually just getting good at the patterns and the mechanics. As a young kid, really hard to realize those types of things. And I think looking back on some of them, it's like, really? You can just stand here and beat the boss? Okay, cool.
Well, because you kind of expect to always be moving around and doing stuff when you're a kid, because that's what
You're
sort
in
of
the
makes
action.
sense. Exactly. You're there. You're playing your favorite cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I have very fond memories of playing this as a kid, because for me, I had the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game for the NES, which was okay.
Yeah.
A lot of people have
didn't
some
like
very
that
not
game.
great memories of that game.
I only like that game going back to it, to be honest with you. I didn't like it at the time either.
Yeah, at the time, it made me very, very angry, whereas this was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember playing it mostly in the arcades, because I didn't have this for my home console, so this was an awesome, okay, you're out at a bowling alley or a roller rink, man, I sound old, with your friends, and you take piles of quarters because you know that this game is there, and it's got 4-player, and even when you got the arcade 1-Up cab, we played through this together and had a ton of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't challenging because, yes, it's the difficulties hid behind just pumping quarters into the machine.
Yeah, you really have to put a limitation on yourself if you wanted to make it harder. And that's why with like Neo Geo or other arcade games, what I like to do is what I call the Nintendo rule. And it's just because all the Nintendo games had basically 3 continues and then like the 2 or 3 lives based off of your starting thing. So I would always set the dip switches so that, or just put that hard self-limitation on it to see how far I could get. And if I couldn't beat it, then I'd be like, okay, well, maybe try and beat it with 5 continues. And then if I could do that, then I would do it with 4 and then do it with 3 to see if I could beat it with the Nintendo rule, so to speak. So just to give it a layer of challenge, because the challenge is, do you have $20 in quarters to beat it, right? In some cases.
Going back and playing this, because I played this as well,
Yeah.
it is hard.
It is.
I'm not good at this. You have essentially 4 buttons.
Yeah.
You're either moving up, down, left and right, or slightly diagonal.
Mm-hmm.
You're jumping,
Yep.
attacking, jumping and attacking,
Yeah.
or the double attack,
Yeah.
which is a weird
A-
combination of attack and jump.
Yeah. Yeah, you had to get inventive with the Nintendo, whether you had to press down an attack or a button right after the other, or double tap a certain button to get a move to work.
So it is really simple. So I mean, as far as that kind of goes for me, I mean, I think that's wonderful. I think that simplicity is wonderful. The challenge could be a little bit of a barrier for people, I think.
Yep, for sure. And I've put in hundreds of hours into this game, so it didn't take me long to get better at the game. I didn't get back to where I used to be as a kid, because honestly, I played it just this past weekend and then a little bit tonight with you.
Well, the skill disparity shows, though, when you and I are playing it, though, because...
Yeah, I have like 3 times as many points as you.
Okay, it was like 2.5, but still, yeah, it was a lot more. Yeah, there was various sections where you had 3 to 4 times more kills than I did. Like, and that's just because you know what you're doing. I felt like the little brother tagging along. Like, I was the Tails in this situation. I was surprised that my controller was even plugged in.
It wasn't, folks.
There was a lot of times where JC would just be like, "Just eat the pizza."
Yeah,
I'm like, you have way more health than me. You're like, yeah, just take it.
It's fine. You're at 0 lives. I'm at 1. Just take the pizza. It's good. Yeah, for sure. And to be fair, the beat 'em up games and the games like the run and gun games of that era are very much like that, where you have to there's skill disparity and you have to put in the time basically in order to like beat the boss, because the end boss is super hard. And I think it doesn't deter you that the game has that skill disparity. The one thing that will is the end boss, because if you don't make it to the end boss with extra lives, then you probably are going to have a really hard time, especially since Shredder has his lightning bolt attack and he just turns you into a baby turtle, and you end up, it takes an entire life from you. So if you don't have lives going in, then
that lightning bolt is like a half room cleave too.
It is. It's
like, that's insane.
Huge arc. It's insane. And I recall whenever we played it on the arcade cabinet, whenever we originally played through that, we just died and put in
just mash the quarters. Like, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
A couple more
We're
quarters
having fun. It doesn't matter. Yeah. And sure, we could try and get better at that game, and we could get better at that game too, but you're not forced to, is really the difference.
No, and that's the thing. I think if you're playing something like the arcade version of this, you have a couple of friends around, you have, a few sodas or whatever, and you're having some laughs. Yeah, sure, you spend a fake $50 and beat this in like an hour. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Or if I came over here and we had no specific plans, and you're like, you know what, I really want to bust out TMNT 2 arcade on the NES and like really focus down, get good, and then beat it, I'd be like, that sounds like a commitment, JC. Is there something else we could play?
Where on the weekend I played the game with one of my friends, and his comment on the game was actually very similar to yours, where he said he doesn't know if he himself would go back to it, but if I wanted to sort of train and get better at the game and beat it as a 2-player instead of just 1 player, then he would be willing to do that for a few weekends, for example, or a couple weekends, for example, and play it. But just going back to it himself, my impression was that he didn't really care to.
It's interesting because this kind of reminds me a little bit of like League of Legends.
Right.
As weird as that's going to be to say, because they're 2 completely different genres.
Yeah.
But really,
very different genres.
There's no difference kind of between how you have to approach these things.
Sure.
You can't just go into League of Legends and expect to be Challenger.
Yeah.
You can't just go into this and expect to play through it in one sitting.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, because one of the things that my friend way back, whenever I originally played this game a lot, whenever I had like first tried to beat the game with an old friend in school, was we could get to the ninja at the end of like the Japanese level, really, without dying once, and then we might die a couple of times versus him and get to the Technodrome without basically dying, because we needed all the continues to beat Krang and Shredder together, and we needed to try and get there. It was beneficial to get there with extra lives. So if you kind of bounce the extra kills around and get the extra lives, but that was the challenge, was to be able to beat Bebop, Rocksteady, and like Slash and everybody as you go through the game and just not die and like tag out properly and stuff like that. Because going through the game and killing the mobs in this version isn't the hard part if you have the AB mechanic down pat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that ending is brutal.
Mm-hmm.
Brutal. You have a boss followed by another boss followed by a third boss that has 2 phases.
Yeah.
What?
Why?
This
Why?
is like, and on top of that, you only have what, 3 lives? No, 2 lives and 3 continues.
Yeah, and you get an extra life every 200 kills.
But in the time that we played it, I don't think
You only get a
hit
few
200.
lives. Yeah, you only get a few lives, so
It's very limited.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's gross.
that's why I was saying you need to get to near the end of the game without dying, basically.
So that's what I'm saying. This is an investment.
It, yeah.
Yeah, if you enjoy, okay, I'm going to get good.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, okay, I'm going to grind away at level 1,
Yep.
you know, build up my XP, get whatever, buy items, buy moves, level up, all that. No, you can't.
Mm-hmm. And I would just like to mention, because I find this kind of funny, because being a person who is better at the game, and I think anybody who's watching who is also good at the game is likely laughing, because it's like, well, the game's not hard. But we fail to remember that whenever we first played the game, and with no experience of this game, it was pretty brutal. And like, even so, like the uppercuts from like Bebop and kicks from like Rocksteady and everything, or just any of the things where like, sure, you can stun lock them for a few hits, but then you're just going to lose a tick. You're going to lose a tick continually if like you're not fast enough. Because like one of the biggest strategies on some of them is just your timing of everything with your jump kicks on the bosses, because most of the bosses can be killed by jump kicking.
Yeah,
that's kind of the strategy,
which makes
or
sense because it's kind of
if you tag them on the left and right a little bit, if one person stun locks them and then you walk away and then the other person can maybe stun lock them, because then he'll try and retaliate, but then he'll get stun locked again from the other person. Those are kind of like 2 of the common strategies, I would say. Or like if you have a full tick and you can see him flashing, if you have a full life bar and you see him flashing and the other person doesn't have a full life bar, you just trade in, you do double attacks on him until you sort of like hope to do enough damage, so it's just quicker basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, just,
and you get a life bar reset.
Yeah,
once you kill a boss, which is nice.
Which is kind of nice.
You know,
but you don't get any lives or anything like that from them, or any points for killing them. So it's just killing those foot soldiers. But yeah.
And it's not that I don't play hard games, because I do play hard games.
No, you certainly do.
I do, but this is challenging, and I think the last time I would have played this, well, I mean, the last time I played this was probably 3 years ago. We were in your living room just pumping quarters into it. And
the AI in the arcade version is a little bit more enhanced, which is kind of unfortunate because Manhattan Project has better AI than Turtles 2. But the arcade version has better version than the NES arcade version. So it's a port, right? So it's going to have some deficiencies.
Though as far as ports go, it's pretty great. Like I thought the sprites looked pretty good.
Yeah, they still look pretty decent for today. The bosses are nice and big, which is something that I like about them. And each of the bosses have a unique pattern, and it's not the same pattern over and over again, which is something that I look for in beat 'em up games. For example, like whenever I'm playing Streets of Rage, which is another game that I really like, I really enjoy how the bosses are very unique in their patterns whenever you fight them. And then you have like the levels that you go through, and it's not just the same one over and over again, because as compared to Double Dragon, for example, you kind of just fight the same guy over and over again. Mm-hmm. So it kind of takes away from it a little bit, in my opinion.
Well, that was
one
of the things
that
was one of the things you pointed out to me when we were fighting the ice level boss, which is one of the NES only levels.
Yeah.
Was when he's throwing these giant rocks at you, or ice balls, I assume.
Yeah, they're ice balls.
But they're targeting you.
Yeah, so he'll throw them a long distance or a short distance instead of just a normal arc, which a lot of simpler games would do, which was a testament to Konami, because they were really good, I think, at making multiplayer games at the time. So, yeah.
Oh, I thought this was Ultra.
Oh, yeah. Ultra and Konami are the same thing. It's just a licensing thing.
Yeah, no, they're totally different.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, look into that if you want to know more about it. Ultra and Konami were the same thing.
That's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. One of the things that I felt detract this still today and as a kid was that didn't use the 4 score, because there was games that used the 4 score for the Nintendo that came out earlier than this, which came out in 1990. But as we mentioned, it's was kind of a limitation of the console, in my opinion. You can see some slowdown whenever there's a lot of enemies, and just putting 4 turtles on it. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because whenever you look at later games in the 8-bit and the 16-bit era that are beat 'em ups, generally it's only 1 player or 2 player whenever it's on a console. And I get it, there's a lot of sprites there, but I always found that kind of as sort of a deterrent. So it's kind of like, well, you could just play the arcade version from like Xbox Live or something like that. But
Yeah, that's what makes this specifically a bit of a bummer, because it's the turtles.
yeah, and there's 4 of them.
Yeah.
And I mean, like Shredder's Revenge, it's 6 players. That's freaking awesome. You can just play and go. But
Yeah,
we live in a modern age of the internet, so that kind of just ups the game. So
well, that's the thing that would make this this specifically a little bit more difficult for me to say. I think it's worthwhile going back and playing.
Yeah.
Not that I don't think it was like, I had fun playing it with you, and if somebody really wants to play this, and when this is released on the Cowabunga collection,
yeah,
absolutely, it'll be super easy to find and really easy to play. But right now, I think there is so many more accessible and better things.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to look at, because I know you value that with games that are like whether or not they're still worth playing, and the Cowabunga collection is allegedly coming out this year. I have a feeling it might get delayed, but we'll see. And this game has been locked since 1990, effectively, because
Yeah.
it hasn't come out. This version, as far as I'm aware, hasn't come out on any other platform. I don't think it's been on the Wii Store or anything like that. And
Well, because generally the versions that we get of this are the arcade
version because
it's 4 players.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
But even that, like, if you didn't pick it up on Xbox Live Arcade way back in the day, I don't think you can currently.
no.
So unless you have that on your console from back then, or had purchased it then and can re-download it, you're looking at having to buy the Arcade 1-Up cab, which is
Expensive.
It is expensive. You can get them on sale sometimes because it is one of the older
Yeah,
ones.
you can find them at like Walmart for like half price and stuff like that.
Sometimes, yeah. And if you do, absolutely grab it. It's worthwhile. But this version particularly, you'd have to get like an NES or something that's able to play that as well as the cartridge.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, my final thoughts on the game, on whether or not it's still worth playing, is that yes, I think it's still worth playing because of its uniqueness, and that it's still fun, and that I just still enjoy going back to it. It feels like 8 different levels and 8 unique bosses, kind of like different Mega Mans, for example. I do acknowledge that TMNT 3 Manhattan Project is a much better game. It's got a little bit cleaner sprites. The backgrounds are still really well done. The bosses are nice and big as well. The AI is a big thing that makes the game a lot better. But I think that's probably a topic for a different episode.
Unfortunately, I kind of disagree.
Yeah.
I don't think this is as worth going back to with everything that's available currently. When the Cowabunga collection's released, sure, if you pick it up, give it a shot.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to if you already own it.
And my guess is that there's likely going to be save states in that, so it'll make it even more accessible for people who aren't very good at the game as well. So that they can just...
It'll give me an opportunity to finish it.
Yeah, exactly.
Without just pumping quarters in, I'll just have to keep pumping saves in.
Because, like, honestly, even with the level select code, it puts you to the beginning of the Technodrome level, and
Brutally hard.
yeah, you have the continues, but you only have 2 lives, so you couldn't have banked a bunch of lives, and there's only about 200-ish bad guys in the level, so yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge, and unfortunately I just don't think it's as worthwhile going back to.
Oh, that's fair enough. Yeah, I think if you're in it, this is one where we kind of disagree on, but yeah.
Well, I don't think we disagree necessarily, because I had a lot of fun. You think it's fun. We both enjoy the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah,
even
no,
though
for sure.
you like the wrong Ninja Turtle and I like the right Ninja Turtle, and that's
I'm
fine.
Raphael in all the footage.
Yeah, Donatello. It's the way to go. He's the smart one.
My friend played Donatello as well.
Maybe it's a ginger thing. I don't know.
Maybe.
Which is weird because you'd think it would be Michelangelo, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Anyways, we still had a good time playing it. You just think it's a little bit more worthwhile to track down and actually play this.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, nah, when the Cowabunga collection comes out and you pick that up, absolutely give it a shot, but is this worth hunting down right now?
That's fair.
I kind of don't think so. So, I mean, I'd be really interested to know what you guys think in the comments down below.
Yeah, let us know in the comments down below if you think that TMNT 2 Arcade for the NES is still worth playing today, or should you just pass it up for the arcade version?